Welcome to Volume 3 of Dealing with Conflict and Confrontation with Dr. Helga Rohde. And now, the Conflict Police.
That's the tape.
Yes, it is.
That's Volume 3.
That's correct.
And we've already seen all of 1 and 2?
Yes.
We've gone through Volume 1 and Volume 2. Now we're moving on to Volume 3.
That was very good, Jim.
Thank you, Ann.
And that tape right there, Volume 3, that's going to talk about problem solving?
Right again.
Are there any more after this?
No. This is it.
There are no more.
No.
Then what happens next?
You'll be done.
Finished?
All done.
And then you'll let me go?
Well, that depends
Depends on what?
on if you got it,
How much you've understood.
what you've learned.
What you've retained.
Well, all right. Okay, okay, I've learned that there's a difference between conflict and a difference of opinion. And the 5 conflict strategies are yielding, withdrawal, inaction, contending, and problem solving. And who could forget the 6 contentious tactics? Ingratiation, persuasive argumentation, promises, gamesmanship, threats, and dirty tactics. And, of course, the 4 ways that impasse occurs, and the 3 ways to break it. And, oh,
Wow, he's good.
Not that good.
yeah, what am I missing?
Just one of the most important concepts.
What?
Yeah, what?
That the key to resolving conflict is to focus on interests, not positions.
I knew that.
Oh, right, that is important.
Enough said.
Now, next, we're going to talk about 5 important topics. The first one will be preconditions to problem solving. Then we'll talk about the actual strategies of problem solving. Then we shall look at how to get other people to problem solve, especially people who are very difficult to deal with. Then we'll address the specific communication skills that will help you focus on the issues at hand. And we shall also address how to function as a third-party mediator. Now, I'd like to give you a definition, a formal definition of problem solving. It is any effort to locate a mutually acceptable solution. I hope you heard the words. A mutually acceptable solution to the controversy. We're not talking about any tricks. We're not talking about, bamboozling the other party or trying to get something from them without their knowledge. We're talking about a true dual concern and a solution that both parties find acceptable. There are 4 preconditions to actual problem solving. And we could call them a mindset or a set of skills. And they're very important to know about. The first one is that we need to have a true concern for mutual gain. We cannot have a kind of mindset that says, I don't care what happens to the other party, as long as I am the winner. We need to have a real concern that both of us are going to come out feeling that our problems have been solved, that our interests have been satisfied. Now, before I say anything further, I'd like to define what concern is, because I've used that word a few times. And usually when we hear the word concern, we think of, I am concerned about somebody, and that's somebody, usually somebody I care about deeply. Actually, there are 2 kinds of concern. There can be a genuine concern, and that concern is usually for people whom I do dearly care about, people I like, people I love. But there is another kind of concern, and that's called an instrumental concern, and it is otherwise known as a strategic concern. I can have a concern for another person even though I do not particularly like them. I might even not like them at all, let's say hate them, but I can still show concern. Now, you might say to yourself, but if I show concern for somebody I don't like, isn't that faking it? Isn't that dishonest? I would like to say to you that it is not. You can show concern for the other party's goals, even though you don't particularly care about the individual. And the reason I would like to encourage you to do so is because it is absolutely your best chance of gaining cooperation. You know, sometimes people say, well, if somebody does that to me, you know, they show concern, and I discovered that it's not a genuine concern, I don't trust them. Does it really matter what kind of concern people show? Whether it is a genuine concern or whether it's a strategic concern, as long as you and I can cooperate with one another, because you are also concerned that my interests are satisfied. And who cares what goes on in your mind? The other aspect to concern that you need to consider is the aspect of looking to the future. For mutual gain to really occur, we have to think of the future and think of the long-range consequences and not just the short-range consequences. In any kind of conflict situation, I am sorely tempted to think only of what's going to happen right now. What I'd like for you to also be aware of is that in the long run, dual concern, a concern for mutual gain, will also maintain that relationship. Why do I care about the relationship? I mean, all I want is for that person with whom I'm having a conflict and whom I really hate to take a long walk on a short pier. Well, you might say that at the moment, but chances are you don't really mean it, because once you quiet down, you calm down, you think more reasonably, and then you say, oh, I don't want to lose my job, and I don't want to lose that employee, and I really don't want a divorce. And so in the long run, you see that you really do want to maintain that relationship. So it's very important to look to the future and to think of long-range results. The second precondition for problem solving is being flexible on solutions but firm on interests. You remember earlier today in the program we talked about how positions are the vehicle and the interests are the cargo. What I am going to tell you now is that if you are flexible on the cargo, in other words, if you are flexible on the interests, on your interests, which is the real reason that you're having conflict with somebody else, what's going to happen with the conflict? Is it going to get resolved? No, of course not. So you cannot really be flexible about your interests, can you? How in the world are you going to give up your likes and dislikes and your values? All you can do is give in on it. But then you end up feeling like a loser. But you can't really be flexible on that because that's the substance of the conflict. But you can be flexible on the positions, right? On the solutions, on how we are going to satisfy those interests. And now it makes real sense to say, be flexible on solutions, but be firm on interests. You've got to be firm on your interests. But you can be extremely flexible about, well, how are we going to really satisfy those interests? So what you want to remember is the why of the problem is not something you can make concessions on unless you're talking about very low priority interests. But the what or the how we solve the problem, you can be as flexible as possible. There are many, many solutions that when two people are willing to be creative and problem solve together and brainstorm together, we can usually come up with many solutions. Many different positions are possible to satisfy our interests. The third precondition of problem solving is creativity. And you actually need to be creative in two areas. There has to be a real willingness to consider innovative solutions to problems. The two areas in which you need to be creative, and the first is really more important than the second. The first area in which you need to be creative and innovative is in the area of creating an alternative for yourself. We call it a plan B. What are you doing going into a conflict session or a negotiation without any alternatives? You should never do that. Why? Because you don't have any power. You have no power if you do that. Because if you go into a conflict and you want something from that other person, and that other person is the only other individual or source who can give you what you're looking for, do you have any power at all? None whatsoever. None. Because your happiness, what it is that you want, your interests, the satisfaction of those interests depends on that one individual. So you have to create a plan B, a good alternative to an agreement. Now that plan B will not fall from heaven. It won't. You will have to create it, and it's hard work. And it cannot be just a vague fantasy. You know, things aren't going well in that conflict resolution session, in that problem-solving session, and you say, I'm going to do something else. Well, what are you going to do? Well, I don't know. I'll just think of something. Now, that's not a plan B. A plan B has to be something that you're willing to implement. You have to be willing to actually do it. What am I going to do if I and the other person do not come to an agreement? What am I going to do? There are two reasons for a plan B. Number one, it gives you a whole lot more power and confidence in any negotiation, and you are far less prone to yield. And there's another good reason for having a plan B. It is a benchmark for comparing any agreement in any kind of negotiation. I don't care with whom you negotiate. In a conflict, you need to know what kind of agreement is good for you. And the only way that you can really have some sense of confidence about whether your agreement, the solution, is good for you is to have a comparison. Once you have developed a plan B, put it in your back pocket. That's where it stays. You do not take that piece of paper, and I really mean piece of paper, because when you develop a plan B, you've got to write it down. You have to see it in black and white. Only then will you know what's realistic. But it's got to be in your back pocket. You don't use it as a club. And that's what a lot of people do. They'll walk into somebody's office and say, unless you give me a raise, I'm going to go somewhere else. That's absolutely the worst way to start in a conflict situation. And I will tell you later on today, when you whip out that plan B, you don't use it as a threat, you use it only as a warning. There's one other thing I want you to know. Never bluff about a plan B. Never bluff having a good alternative. Because if anybody calls your bluff, you will experience a severe loss of face. Now, there are three questions that I would like to recommend you ask yourself when you develop a plan B. The first one is, what can I do by myself to satisfy my interests? In other words, you go and look for another source. What person is it? Who is it? What can I give them in return? The second question you ask yourself is, what can I do to influence the other party to take my interests seriously? What can I do? Well, you might say, I don't know. Oh, there's lots you can do. Number one, you ask yourself, have I really made it clear to them what my interests are? Can I give them a word picture of what my situation is? Am I the best source who can satisfy their interests, the best one, best source for them? Do they know that? The third question you need to ask, could a third party help me further my interests? Who would that be? Who might be acceptable to both me and the other party? Now, creating a plan B or a good alternative is the homework that you need to do before you ever go into a conflict situation. Now, I'm not suggesting that you do that when you're sitting down with your child or with your spouse and you say, who's going to do the dishes? But I'm certainly going to suggest that if it is anything more serious than that. Why am I talking about homework? Because in any conflict situation, 90% of the time needs to be spent in preparation, and only 10% of your time is spent on actual communicating with the other party. And if you do not do your homework, you deserve what you don't get. Now, the second area in which I would like for you to be creative is to develop a willingness to brainstorm. Brainstorm possible solutions to satisfy both parties' interests. In other words, develop an anything is possible attitude. And that may sound easy, but it isn't. Because when you are embroiled in a battle with somebody else, you are quite often sure that there is no other solution but the one that you want. And so I am suggesting to you, you have to develop this attitude that maybe there are some answers, maybe there are some solutions that I have not thought of. And so I am going to be willing to brainstorm about those. Okay? Obviously, you will not be able to have all the ideas and creative, innovative solutions before you go into the conflict resolution session. Some of them will come out of your discussion with the other party. I will give you a whole lot more detail on how to do that when we actually get to that stage in our problem solving. There's one more precondition, and that is our fourth precondition. And that one is a willingness to separate the people from the problem. You have to give up pointing your finger and saying, and you are the problem. What you have to learn to do is to separate the people from the problem. You have to be tough on the problem. Another way of saying you have to be tough on maintaining, satisfying your interests. But you can be soft on the people. Soft on the people means I have to have a concern for the other side. I have a concern for their interests, asking advice, communicating to their self-esteem. But I have to be tough on the problem. Otherwise, we're not going to get good solutions. I have to insist on satisfying my interests well and the other person's acceptably, remember? Now, I'd like to give you a mental image real quickly because I think it helps you. It'll help you next time you sit in a conflict session. I want you to picture yourself as being on the same side as the person with whom you're having the conflict. And I want you to visualize that you have the problem, and that problem is lying on the table in front of you. As a matter of fact, I'm going to tell you in just a little bit how important it is to literally do that. To actually sit on the same side of the table and put the problem, the piece of paper, the paper that you use for brainstorming, that you use for writing down your ideas and so on, that be separated from the two so that you have a visual image. That person who you think is your enemy, that person who you think is your adversary, is really not. Your adversary is the problem, and you and the other party are partners. And our task is to put our heads together, to come up with a mutually satisfying, mutually acceptable solution. And so one thing that you need to do is don't ask who is the problem, but always ask what is the problem. There are two elements that have primary influence in problem solving. Remember these: trust and firm aspirations. If I am soft on the people, and if I am hard or tough on the problem, I have the best chance of showing people that I mean firm aspirations. And that way, we have a much, much better chance, not only of getting what we want, but also helping the other side getting what they want. I'd like to summarize quickly what the 4 preconditions are to problem solving. This is very important. It is the basis for going into a problem-solving session. And unless you spend a little bit of time thinking about it, and what it means for you, and how you're going to do it, you will have a much tougher time problem solving. But once you see it, once you recognize it, once you are willing to consider those 4 preconditions, you're not going to have nearly as much of a problem doing the actual problem solving. First precondition was show concern for mutual gain. Whether it's genuine concern or strategic concern is really not that important, because both of them lead to what we call enlightened self-interest, and we have a much higher probability of improving the relationship, getting cooperation, and also maintaining our reputation of fairness. Second precondition, flexibility on solutions, but firm on interests. Because the interests are the real reason for the conflict, I cannot possibly be flexible on them. But on the position, on the solutions, I can be very, very flexible and open. Third precondition, creativity. Very necessary for problem solving. We said we want you to create a no agreement alternative for yourself, and we also want you to develop an anything is possible attitude. And the 4th precondition is a willingness to separate the person from the problem. We said make sure that you appeal to the self-esteem of people in order to build trust and show firmness in finding integrative solutions. Now, let's go on to talk about the 4 steps of problem solving. I would never start any kind of problem-solving session before I ask the question, do we really have a conflict here? Or are we perhaps talking about either a disagreement or perhaps a misunderstanding? So what I want to do first, my first step, is always to eliminate false conflicts. Ask yourself, are we just having a disagreement? Do we need to cook rice? Or are we just talking about words here? And if it's just words and we have disagreement, we don't have to do anything, no action needs to be taken, let go of it in one of the 4 ways that we talked about earlier in the program. Second question, is it possible that we have some kind of misunderstanding here? Now, if we have a misunderstanding, we can quite often clear that up rather quickly. But of course, we have to first know that there might be a misunderstanding, and so we address that first before we do any kind of problem solving about a conflict. I might say to you, maybe we're making false assumptions about something. Maybe I'm thinking that the other person's interests are very different than they actually are. I might think, well, you know, they have certain goals when in fact they don't. And so one good way in which I can clear up those misunderstandings is this. I ask the other party to state their viewpoint, and I listen. And then I restate what I have heard until the misunderstood party feels satisfied. And they say to me, yeah, that's exactly what I meant. And then I state my viewpoint, and if necessary, I have the other party restate what they have heard until we have a clear understanding. Now, if we have a true conflict, and we say, yes, we have to work together, we have to live together, something has to happen, we need to act on the problem, and then I go to the next step. I go to the second step of problem solving, which essentially is analyzing interests. We can just talk about what it is I want, what it is that you want, and we quite often make some concessions, and we have a resolution to the conflict. But in more complicated situations, I cannot urge you enough to how important it is for you to sit down with a piece of paper, make a list of your interests. Now, what you need to ask yourself is this: what's the problem? Now, I'm hoping that you're not saying, the problem is the other person. So, what's the problem? What is it that you like? What is it that you don't like? Why is it a problem for you? After you've done that, you prioritize the list. Now, I would like for you to prioritize it into 3 categories. First one, concessions that I can give away. I can just, hey, these things aren't that important for me, and so I can just give them away. Second one, concessions that you're willing to trade. You don't want to throw everything out the window. You want to have some bargaining chips. And the third category are concessions that you absolutely will not concede on because they constitute the core of the problem. Now, you might say to yourself at this point, as a lot of people do when I talk about this, who's got the time to do this? I will tell you this. It takes much less time than the usual fretting and worrying that you do, because when we fret and worry, we are disorganized. This kind of thinking is very organized, and it's not going to take very much time at all. Now, along with analyzing your own interests, you also might want to analyze the other person's interests. Of course, there you can only make some good guesses, some educated guesses. If you know the person very well, it's not going to be very hard for you. If you don't know them very well, you might want to access some people who know them, and talk around a little bit, ask some questions. Why is it important for you to know their interests? Because it's much easier to deal with them, and you can make some suggestions, perhaps, that they're willing to accept. And you will appear as though you're empathic, and people will say, wow, she knows me a little bit. Okay, so do make some very good guesses. I also would suggest that perhaps you make some notes on a piece of paper. One very good way in which you could analyze another person's interest, if you don't know them very well, is to put yourself in their shoes, to try and imagine what it's like to be in their shoes, and then asking yourself, what might they want if I were that person? What kinds of things would I be afraid of? What would I wish for? Now, whether you analyze or not, you must always follow this rule. Discuss the problem before the solution. When we talk about the solution first and then talk about the problem, we are putting the cart before the horse. Because then we are telling people what we want and we are taking on a positional approach. Why are you saying that your idea is the only one that will solve this problem? Why not do it another way? What if we did such and such? Those are 3 questions that I would highly recommend you remember. Why not, and what if? Asking those 3 questions will give you a lot of insight into the other party and into their interests. Now, you might say to yourself, but for years and years now, I've heard people tell me, speakers and seminars that I have attended, that when there's a problem, I should always come in with some suggested solutions. Oh, that's very good advice. Of course, you should have some suggested solutions. As a matter of fact, I'm going to tell you that you better do some brainstorming about what solutions are acceptable. But that's not how you start your conflict communication, your problem-solving session. That comes later. First, we've got to talk about what's the problem all about, and why is it a problem for you, and why is it a problem for me, so that we can communicate about our interests. Now, the third step in problem solving is finding solutions. And obviously, as I'd mentioned before, you have to find solutions that will be acceptable to both parties. One way in which we can do that is to jointly brainstorm. The only thing that I want to make sure that you have heard me say is that when you brainstorm jointly with the other side, that you make it very explicit that this is just a brainstorming session. Because it can easily be, if the other party doesn't know that you're just brainstorming, they might think that you are making some solid suggestions and offers to them, and you don't want that misunderstanding to occur. So make it very explicit that all we're doing right now is brainstorming. One of the things that's important, very important, in any kind of conflict resolution or problem-solving session is that you separate inventing from deciding. And so you invent first, and then you make a decision about what it is that you're going to do. Joint brainstorming can be a great deal of fun, as a matter of fact, especially if you do it as a team effort. The only thing that you need to do is remind everybody of the ground rules of brainstorming. Now, what are they? Number one, all ideas are accepted. They are written down. No criticism is allowed, neither verbal nor nonverbal. No rolling of the eyes or sighing. You start with extremes. If you start with extremes, it usually loosens people up and they start to laugh. When you're out of ideas, after you have generated a lot of ideas and you're out of them, then you review the ones that you have written down, you select the most promising ideas, and then you invent improvements for those, and perhaps even look for a combination of ideas. Now, when you're at the decision-making point, you're actually saying, okay, now how are we going to settle this conflict? And then you can suggest a solution. And one of the best ways to do that is to ask a question. Don't dictate to the other side. If you dictate, even though they might agree, you will have a solution that they can't stick to or won't stick to. You cannot impose your ideas on the other side. You need to have a voluntary decision. And so one way in which you can do that is to always ask good questions. You might say to them, how does that sound to you? What kinds of ideas have you got? How would you suggest that we solve this problem? There's one more thing you have to remember, and that is always, when you're at the decision point, always start with the easy issues first. Now, there's a good reason for that. When you start with the easy issues, you can usually get agreement very early on in the problem solving. And then you go on to the harder ones. And when you have early agreement, it is so much easier to get further agreement. Now, if at this point you have not been able to come to a decision, then you go to step number 4 in your problem solving. And step number 4 essentially is making mutual low priority concessions. Now, if you have done the homework that I asked you to do, you can look at your list of interests, you have prioritized them, and at this point you have a pretty good idea which concessions you can make without any detriment to yourself. So you make some low priority concessions, you trade off, and you keep recycling steps 3, steps 4, until you finally get to a decision. You go back to step 3, you look at some more brainstorming perhaps, if it is in order. Don't give up too easily. This takes a little patience, but if you give up too easily, you're not going to come up with very good, what we call integrative solutions. Integrative solutions are those solutions that actually please both parties, that are acceptable to both parties, and so that integrate your interests with the interests of the other side. And you will not get those good solutions if you do not recycle steps 3 and 4. Go back to brainstorming, talk about interests some more, generate more solutions. If needed, make some more concessions until you finally get to some kind of agreement that it's acceptable for both parties. Sometimes in a problem-solving session, no matter how well you do it, no matter how creative you try to be, no matter how reasonable try to be, you will say to yourself, hey, the outcome is not nearly as good as my plan B. And so every once in a while you're going to say to yourself, maybe I ought to implement my alternative to an agreement. But don't walk away too quickly. And the reason that I say that to you is because most people's plan B is not as good as reaching agreement with the party whom they approached to negotiate with in the first place. Now, if you do reach agreement at this point, make sure you put it in writing. Obviously, you don't always have to do that, but you don't even need a formal contract. Just write it down on a piece of paper so that you will not end up saying, oh, you didn't say that, and no, I never said that I would do this, and the promises and all the traits that you have made informally, and make a copy for yourself, make a copy for the other person, and then both of you know what to expect. And I would also suggest that you schedule in some kind of follow-up date so that if it is indeed, let's say, a performance problem in the organization, so that you can go back and say, how are we doing? Have things improved? Do we need to do some more problem solving? There are 3 consequences to problem solving. And I really mean for you to listen to me. And the reason is because at this point, people quite often say, this is way too much work. It is not. Here are the 3 consequences of problem solving. Number 1, it is efficient. It is efficient. Number 2, it has the best chance of maintaining or improving the relationship. And number 3, it produces more lasting agreements.
So, there they are. 4 basic steps to problem solving.
This is very important.
Now, in these 4 steps, it is very important that we remember, number 1, to determine if the situation is a disagreement or a true conflict. Number 2, to analyze both parties' interests. Number 3, to look for solutions to both parties. And D, 4, make some mutual low priority concessions.
Now, the beauty of steps 3 and 4 is that you can recycle them until you finally do get an agreement. You just need to be patient and remember, interests, not position.
But what if the other person doesn't want to problem solve?
I guess we'll just have to watch and find out.
Now, you may ask yourself, okay, look, problem solving, all right, doesn't sound that hard. Yeah, it sounds a little time consuming, but it doesn't sound all that hard. But what am I going to do if the other party doesn't want to problem solve? What am I going to do then if they don't want to cooperate? What am I going to do if they play hardball? And so in our next section, I will tell you how to deal with people who use contentious tactics, who really don't want to problem solve, what the strategies are. We're going to talk about 3 strategies. We're going to talk, number 1, about keeping your composure, how you can do that. Now, that's what you wanted to know all your life, right? Number 2, we will talk about playing it side by side. And number 3, how to let others know that you are firm, but also negotiable. First strategy, keeping your composure. What I shall tell you is what you have known for all your life. You do the opposite of what you feel like doing. What do you feel like doing? You feel like going for the jugular. And I'm going to tell you to do exactly the opposite of that. Now, people always say at this point, well, how? How? I'll tell you how. The first way in which you can keep your composure and do the opposite of what you feel like doing is to focus on your interests. What are your interests? Why are you there in the first place? It's because you want to solve the problem. You want to get agreement. And chances are you want to maintain the relationship. You want your interests satisfied. It's another way of saying keep your eye on the ball. If you do that, you will not be sidetracked. Let me tell you how focusing on your interest helps you in actually 3 ways. Number 1, it'll help you maintain your composure. Number 2, it keeps you focused on the real issues. And number 3, it will leave you flexible on solutions. But you got to keep reminding yourself. Now, one good way in which you can do that is to take that list that you did as homework when you were identifying your interests, and you put it on the table in front of you. Keep it in your field of vision. Or if you think that other people can see it and you don't want them to, then hold it up. You don't have to hold it real close to your chest, but at least you've got it there, and it'll remind you why you're there in the first place. Second way in which you can keep your composure. You recognize the nasty tactics. Remember I told you earlier, somebody's trying to manipulate you, somebody's trying to play a one-upmanship with you. Hey, sometimes those are hard to recognize. But recognition is at least half the battle. And so I don't want you to be overly suspicious, but I do want you to, you know, recognize them when they do happen. Remember I told you, you need multiple clues and you need a series of those behaviors before you can suspect that somebody is really trying to play one-upmanship or manipulate you. Those are harder to recognize. Personal attacks are not hard to recognize because they hit you right in between the eye. So, recognition, half the battle. The third way in which you can keep your composure is to know your hot buttons. Do you know what your hot buttons are? Do you know when somebody says something or does something, at what point you actually start to lose it? Is it when somebody calls you stupid or brain dead or idiot or talks down to you or treats you like a kid? Now you need to know that, because at that point the red flag ought to go up in your brain, and that flag says careful. You need to learn how to deactivate your hot buttons. You see, it's this way. If your emotions take over in a conflict resolution session, in a problem-solving session, you will be totally blinded to the cost of fighting, and you're just going to fight. I had a woman once in a seminar who said, I won't let people get my goat because I won't let them know where it's tied up. So what that essentially means is when somebody tries to push your buttons, you just don't take the bait. You keep talking about the problem. You keep talking about the interests. Or you can assert yourself. You can stand up for yourself. If somebody attacks you personally, why not look the person in the eye and say, there is really no need to attack me personally. We can solve this problem. All we have to do is cooperate. The fourth way in which you can keep your composure is to pause and leave your body. Now, what do I mean by leaving your body? Have you ever done something or said something, and then you looked at yourself and you said, did I say that? That's the kind of leaving your body that I'm talking about. Actually, I just use it as a way of saying you need to pause for a moment. You need to become an observer for a moment and say, wait a minute, what's going on? Now, why will that help me? When you get angry, there is a biochemical change in your body. And that biochemical change, you cannot get rid of by saying to yourself, I shouldn't be angry, or I'm not angry. It's not possible. The only way that you can allow the equilibrium in your body or your reasonable composure to return is if you pause for a minute and you allow those biochemical changes to dissipate. And then you can start thinking reasonably again. You know what common wisdom tells us? When you're angry, count till 10. And when you are very angry, count to 100. And some of us have to count to 1,000. There is an old proverb that gives us very good advice. Be quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to act. And actually all that says is break the automatic link between your emotions and your actions. The fifth way in which you can maintain your composure is to maintain a healthy skepticism. Now, have you ever heard the statement, just because people are out to get you doesn't mean you have to be paranoid? What I'd like for you to do is turn it around. Just because you're paranoid does not mean people are out to get you. What I am telling you is that you should not assume that other people mean you harm, even though they are tough players, even though they might appear to you to be stubborn and not willing to make concessions and what have you. It still does not necessarily mean that people are out to get you. Of course, at the same time, it does not mean that you have to trust them wholeheartedly. And that is what I mean by healthy skepticism. Now, there's one thing that is really important to remember. The more suspicious you are of the motives of the other person, the harder it is for you to deal with really tough players, because you are much more prone to losing your cool. A second strategy that will help you dealing with people who are tough and essentially convince others or motivate others to problem solve, and that is play it side by side. We sometimes call that aligning with the other party, partner-oriented problem solving. Now, you're not going to be able to do that unless you keep your composure, I promise you that. That really takes some calmness. It takes the ability to reason and be reasonable. One way in which you can do that is to put yourself in the other person's shoes. Now, I'd like to give you a visual image of that, some kind of mental image. I quite often think that when people are in a conflict, the conflict is like an elephant. It's right in the middle. One person stands at one end of the elephant, the other person at the other end. The person who stands in front of the elephant describes the elephant, and of course they only say what they see, the big ears and the tusks. And the person who stands on the back side of the elephant, you know what they see. Now, what is happening is that they're talking to each other and they don't even know that they're talking about the same thing. They think that the differences are so great that they cannot even reconcile them in any way. One of the smartest things you can do is to walk around the elephant. That is what I call that's what we usually think of as putting yourself in the other person's shoes. My mental image is walk around the elephant. Remember that next time you have a conflict with somebody or you're negotiating. See yourself walking around the elephant. Will you promise me that? It is otherwise called as empathy. Now, nobody is talking about getting you to sympathize with the other side. What we're talking about is becoming smarter, because you're always smarter when you can see the issues and the problems from their side, their interests, because you will guess at what their interests are. You will be able to make suggestions to them that they might be willing to accept. You're always going to be smarter, and don't say to yourself, well, why should I do it? The other person doesn't do it. Don't ever do that, because you will benefit by walking around the elephant. Now, you also have to convey that to people. You have to say it to them. You have to say things like, I can understand how that might be a problem for you. Do you know what a transformation can occur in a difficult relationship if you express this kind of empathy? Sometimes people will say, wow, somebody understands. Now, another benefit to walking around the elephant is that you can recognize what might be going on in terms of their difficult behavior. If you say to yourself, you know, quite often we say, oh, that person is so stubborn, I don't know what's wrong with them. But if you walk around the elephant, you can say, why might they be difficult? What's behind it? Are they afraid of something? Maybe they're afraid of their boss. Maybe there's something else that's going on. Do they have some past grievances? You see, you will have so much more insight. And it'll also make it much easier for you not to retaliate with hostility and instead to show respect. Another way in which you can play it side by side is to express concern for the relationship. I can't tell you how much mileage I have gotten out of that one. Say to the other person explicitly, I don't want you and me to be enemies. If they hear you say it, and you say it sincerely, and chances are you're not lying, because remember, one of your long-range interests is to maintain the relationship. And so you say it to them, and you will get so much goodwill from that. Sometimes people are really taken aback. They didn't realize you want to maintain the relationship. They thought you wanted to be their enemy. So don't wait until you feel like saying it. Say it, because it's probably not a lie. Another thing you must do in playing it side by side is letting them save face. And that's sometimes hard, especially when you're dealing with liars, when you're dealing with people who want to deceive you. Because what's going on in your head is, do they think I'm so stupid that I believe these lies? And of course, what you want to do then is to punish them for that. What I'd like for you to learn to do is to say, I really don't benefit from making them lose face. If you say to that person, you are a liar, guess what's going to happen? They're just going to become defensive and the conflict will increase. There are two things you can do with liars. You can say to them, number one, my information is different. And the second thing you can do is to make a reasonable request. And the reasonable request essentially is, you won't mind if I check it out, will you? Now, how are they going to deny that? Another way to play it side by side, and this is important, I really would like for you to remember this, is to ask questions and wait for the answer. Use silence. As a matter of fact, those two skills are probably your most important tools in any problem-solving or negotiation session. Ask questions. Don't make statements. Statements are easy to fight, but questions nobody can fight. And you ask the question and you wait for the answer. It's one of the most diplomatic ways of conflict resolution. Say to the other side, how do you see it? Do you have any suggestions? Very good technique with backstabbers, people who stab you in the back. What did you say to them? What makes it so hard for you to talk to me about what I'm doing that you don't like? Why are you going to somebody else and talking behind my back? Another good way is when people give you labels or they use general ways of accusing you. They use those dirty tactics in personal attacks. They say things like, you're impossible to work with. You're a most unreliable person. There are two questions I want you to remember in response to those kinds of generalized statements. Number one, what do you mean? That question is actually asking for a definition of terms. What do you mean when you say I am irresponsible? Now please clothe it in more careful language. You don't just stand in front of somebody and say, now what do you mean? But say, can you please tell me what you mean when you say that I am unreasonable? The second question is, how do you know? And that question is asking for evidence. Please tell me, when did I do that? Don't defend yourself. The key ingredient is to ask for more specific criticism, not to be defensive, but to invite more criticism rather than less criticism. There is one more question that I think you will find most profitable to ask, because it quite often gets people on your side. When you have come to a point in your problem solving and you think that the other party is just not willing to listen, they are denying every kind of solution, every suggestion you're making, they're saying, no, it won't work. One question that will usually get them to listen and to think is the question, what would you do in my place? And then you wait. There's one more thing that you can do when you play it side by side, and that is to use humor. Please laugh, but don't laugh at the other side. Laugh at yourself, laugh at the situation. I had a client one time who was embroiled in this huge conflict fight with his partner. And right in the middle of his shouting match, he stopped, he looked his partner in the eye, and he said, I think our fight is just a pimple on an elephant's behind. They both broke out laughing. Now, whatever you can find to laugh about, this is one good way to have humor is actually to laugh about yourself. And it lightens things up. It's amazing how great of a tension releaser laughter is. There was a man in one of my seminars who told me this story. He said he was witness to two men fighting with each other, and he said one man's face was totally red and angry, and they were almost toe-to-toe. And the person on the receiving end of this abuse suddenly stepped forward and put a big kiss right on the other guy's mouth. Now, he said there were witnesses to this. The whole team was there. And he said people were falling off their chair laughing. And, of course, one of the major benefits of that was, and I'm not suggesting you use this, okay? I'm not. But one of the major benefits was to the guy who kissed the other man, said he never had to do it again, never. Next time the other man showed signs of anger, he just puckered his lips. So, don't leave your humor at home. Now, we have one more strategy to talk about in dealing with tough players, and that is to let them know that you are firm, but you're negotiable. That's for really tough people, and you have to do it with great skill. That's for people who play games, who manipulate, who threaten, and a variety of other things, who essentially use pressure tactics in order to get you to give in, who want to coerce you to do it their way. You need to tell them that you are firm, and you need to show them. You need to show them that you will not play by their rules. There are two major points. The first one is you have to know how to stand up for yourself without fighting, And the second one is you have to know how to warn people and not make it sound like a threat. Warning, but not threatening. Now let's talk about the first, standing up. When you stand up, by standing up we mean you use the pronoun I and you pinpoint the other person's behavior. I said behavior. You're not going to pinpoint to the other person and say you're the problem, but you're going to pinpoint the behavior that disturbs you. It might be something like this. I don't like waiting more than 15 minutes. Please, can we reschedule our meeting? It might be, I am disturbed when you interrupt me. Would you please not do that? I'm using I statements and I'm pinpointing the behavior. You will be amazed how different of a response you get when you use that strategy. When people withdraw eye contact, quite often withdrawal of eye contact can be extremely unsettling. All you have to do is fall silent. Look away. Don't say anything. You don't have to look away. But when the other person does, you don't have to say anything. Just fall silent. Stop talking. Those are all ways in which you can actually deal with somebody who's a tough player. When you're dealing with somebody who tries to send you on a guilt trip, say to them, look, I'm really starting to feel guilty. I'm starting to feel defensive. Does it really make sense for either one of us to feel guilty and defensive? Wouldn't it be far better if we solved the problem? When you're dealing with threatening people, please tell them that you will respond to reason any time, but you will not respond to force. You will not respond to aggressive behavior. Now, when somebody becomes highly agitated, one of the best things you can do is to let them get it off their chest. And then you look them in the eye, and you can say to them, I think you and I can solve that problem without attacking each other. I think we can do that. If you want to be really firm and you're dealing with a really, really difficult person, all you have to do, and again, it takes really some confidence to pull it off, but you could do it. And you could say, you can look them right in the eye and you say, I normally don't shout, but if you would like for us to get into a yelling match, I'll give it a try. When you're dealing with sarcasm, people always ask me, how do I deal with sarcasm? Those people can actually drive you up a wall, okay? Tell you, real good way of doing that. Again, it's firm but negotiable. You're not breaking off the relationship, but it's firm. Take the sarcasm at face value. You might say to an individual, so you are saying that my idea has given the word intelligence a whole new meaning. Any ideas on how we can improve on it? Now, what you have done is you pretended you haven't been insulted at all. You take it at face value, and it works like a charm. You know why? Because those people quite often expect you to be at a loss for words, that you won't know what to say. And now they have to respond to your sincere invitation for some solution. Another option that you have is sidestepping any attack. You can just sidestep it. And how do we do that? You keep talking about the interests. You keep asking questions. You keep getting back to the real meat of why the conflict exists in the first place. Now, the second part of our last strategy is actually warning people, but not threatening them. Let me make the distinction between a warning and a threat. It's a very fine line. When I warn somebody, I am actually telling them about the natural consequences that will occur as a result of non-agreement. When I threaten somebody, what I am doing is telling them what I will do to punish them if we do not get to an agreement, if they don't give me what I want. So you see, there is quite a distinction. There's quite a difference. Now, what I might want to do when I am at a point, it looks like we're getting to a standstill. We're now coming to a point where no more negotiation seems possible. I want to alert the other side to the costs of no agreement, okay? That's what a warning is all about. I want to alert them what it'll cost them when we don't agree. And the best way in which you can do that is to ask a question. And the question might be like this: what do you think will happen if we don't agree? It is the same question that I mentioned to you earlier in this program when we were talking about breaking off temporarily, that reminds people of the stake in the relationship. And so that's what you want to do. And then you wait for the answer, because the other side, when you say, what do you think will happen if you and I can't come to an agreement, the other side will then quite often come up with a solution or a reason to continue the negotiation, which is far better than if you tell them. If you're deadlocked in a blaming game, which quite often happens at this point, then please ask people, invite them to look to the future and say, let's not waste time to talk about things that are past, but let's talk about how we can make sure that these mistakes don't occur again. Now, if all else fails, you've tried it all, and you still have not arrived at a solution, and at this point, what is in your back pocket? Remember what's in your back pocket? Your plan B. And that's what you do now. You pull it out and you say, look, I have an alternative at this point. If you and I cannot come to an agreement, I'm going to implement that alternative. And you owe it to yourself. Now, don't use it as a club. All you want to say to people is, I really have no choice at this point, because if I stop the negotiation now, if we do not resolve this conflict in any better way than where we are at this point, I'm going to do something else. Now, the thing that is important at any point in any of the strategies and tactics I have mentioned is that you keep saying the door is open, that you keep telling people, I am available. Even after you have divulged your plan B, you need to say that to people and say, if you would like to talk further, here's my phone number, or I will be in the office at 9 o'clock. I'll be glad to sit down and talk with you some more. Now, you might say at this point, okay, now we have exhausted everything. There's nothing else left. Oh, yes, there's one more thing. And that one more thing is, advise them of your plan B or suggest the intervention of a third party. Advise them of your plan B or suggest the intervention of a third party.
Well, I wish I knew this stuff before.
What do you mean?
Well, the way Hedges and Benson were at each other's throats.
And what would you do differently now?
Well, the first thing I'd do is keep my cool. And then I'd focus on their interests. You know, play it side by side the way Hedges said. And then I'd state the problem. And then I'd try to look at both their sides and try to get them both involved in the problem-solving process. See, the way I did it before, I just lost my temper.
Oh, your reaction was perfectly understandable.
Yeah,
Brent.
but still,
It's easy to second guess. But it's never really over till it's over.
That's right. Until that last little itty-bitty dog has buried that last great big bone.
You're right.
Until the barrel has finally been scraped, until the final exit ramp is finished, until we've drank our last drop of coffee and the waitress has brought around our final check.
Jim,
Yes?
that's enough.
Oh. Oh, I'm sorry, I was just trying to explain.
Tell you what, Brandon. Let's just bring them in. Hedges, Benson, right now. Give it another try.
Oh, no, 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 that's not necessary.
We don't mind.
No, honestly, I think I've got it down.
Give you a chance to try out what you've learned.
No, really.
Get your feet wet.
No, no, really.
We're bringing them in.
Good. Good. That's great, really.
Ann?
And I just get so frustrated when we fall behind. I mean, there's enough things that can go wrong without all these other problems.
Yeah, I know what you mean. I feel the pressure too. I've got creative making changes. I feel responsible. It's my job to get the changes in.
Well, I think you both have some really good points. But if we're constantly at odds with each other, what do you think's going to happen?
Well, it sounds like neither one of us will be able to get our jobs done.
Yeah, we'll just get farther and farther behind.
Exactly. Now listen, I don't expect us to resolve this problem right away, but I do think we can come up with some constructive actions that'll keep our departments happy and keep us on schedule. All right, so I want you to give this a little thought, and we'll meet again. What do you think?
Sounds all right.
It's okay by me.
Well, thanks for your cooperation. We'll call if we have any more questions.
We can go?
You're free to leave.
Great.
Not quite yet.
Well, you let them leave.
Well, we're not quite finished with you. Just one more section. It covers some basic skills that I think you could use.
10 communication skills for problem solving and how to become a mediator.
Is this the last section?
This is it.
You're sure?
Positive.
Okay, great.
I will now tell you about the 10 on-task discussion rules. These rules will facilitate understanding, they'll show respect, they'll help you stay on track, and they will increase your efficiency at arriving solutions. Their intent is to help you build trust while at the same time showing firmness. Now, one thing that I would recommend that you do is take these 10 discussion rules and put them on a flip chart. Hang them on the wall if you're doing team problem solving. Or in your family, you might just want to put them on the refrigerator as ground rules for any kind of conflict mediation so that everybody knows how to talk. Rule number 1, all parties state their problem. Using I statements because they convey responsibility and there will be less blaming going on. Acknowledge the other person's problem as just as legitimate and say to them, I am willing to help with that. Don't zap. Now, if you don't know what zapping is, you haven't been married long enough. It's essentially name-calling or using put-downs. The person who gets zapped is responsible for pointing it out. There must not be any cross-complaining. Sometimes when people talk about what their problem is, it sounds like a complaint, and you will be sorely tempted to respond with your own complaint. Don't do that. Rule number 2, let them talk and listen. Do not interrupt. It is one of the best concessions that you can make in any kind of problem-solving session. Acknowledge people verbally and non-verbally. Tell them you are listening. Nod your head, give them eye contact, show interest, and do your friendly grunting. Yes, I see, and so on. Restate what you have heard. This is one way in which you can prevent misunderstanding from occurring. In any conflict resolution session, if there's a misunderstanding, I would stop immediately and make sure that we do this mutual restating. Offer an apology when appropriate. You don't have to get down on your knees, but at least say, I'm sorry, or I regret. Rule number 3, ask clarifying questions. Why? Why not? What if? A what if question is known as testing the waters, or in negotiation lingo is called a trial balloon. It allows you to consult with the other side without making a firm offer. What if we did such and such? No accusations as far as why questions are concerned. Really want to warn you about that. People sometimes confuse it. An accusatory why question is something like this. Why are you so stubborn? That's not a question. That's hidden blame. Use silence to convey that you are waiting for an answer. If the other person doesn't respond right away, don't rescue them. Just tolerate the pregnant pause. Rule number 4, stay in the present and the future, not in the past. It is true that we can learn from the mistakes that we have made in the past, but that's very, very different than saying you should have or why didn't you. Rule number 5, stick to the topic at hand. No extraneous complaints, no other conflicts must enter into the discussion. Fighting couples usually do that. You should have. I should have married somebody else, and the other one says nobody would have married you in the first place kind of thing. Okay, they go from one complaint to the next. Please don't do that. Discuss one topic at the time, settle it, then go on to the next one, perhaps at another moment. Rule number 6, look for areas of agreement. It builds a foundation for further agreement. It shows that you have common interests, that you have similarity, and it increases the chances that you will be civil toward each other. Now, you will remember that I had told you earlier, when you're at a decision point, that you need to start with the easier issues. If you do that, you will have early agreement, and so you will go on to further. Rule number 7, if the discussion escalates, withdraw temporarily, but not before you schedule your next discussion. Say to the person, we're not getting anywhere, let's do it another time. Let's talk about this another time. Now, don't wait too long before you schedule the next discussion. And the reason that I tell you that is because you will lose your motivation to settle the conflict if you don't pick up soon after you make that temporary break. Rule number 8, mutual restating and paraphrasing. I had already mentioned to you, if anybody feels misunderstood, stop everything and then just paraphrase until both parties feel satisfied. And then, only then, do you proceed with the problem solving. Rule number 9, all requests for change should be stated in behavioral terms. Now, that's a big order. I want to warn you about that because it needs practice before it becomes a habit. What we usually do is accuse people of having the wrong attitude. And I'd like to remind you of the fact that attitudes don't cause problems, behaviors cause problems. And so you cannot ask another person, number 1, to change their attitude, number 2, to feel differently. Their feelings come from their values and their past learning, and they can't possibly change those, and neither will you. And you cannot ask people to be different. You need to accept them the way they are. Problem solving is not the same as changing a person. You need to learn to accept them. If your request is the other party to stop doing something, you need to tell them what to do instead. You cannot just say, I don't like this. You need to also say, well, what would you like? How would you like for them to behave? Rule number 10, body language rules. There are actually 3 things I'd like to recommend here. Number 1, make sure that you are consistent within your verbal and nonverbal. Otherwise, you will send incongruent messages. If you want the other party to see you as serious, and then obviously you also have to have serious facial expressions. But if you want to be perceived as friendly, and then smile and make sure that your voice smiles also. Now, quite often people will give us advice. They say in a negotiation, always make a poker face. Sometimes that's good. If you don't want people to know where your goat is tied up, and then making a poker face is not a bad idea. But otherwise, I don't think that you will want anybody to say that your face had all the variety of a post-mortem cardiogram. Now, the second recommendation under body language rules is that you should rely much more on words than on facial expressions when expressing negative feelings. If you say, I'm really upset, but your face looks like you disgust me, the other person will remember your face a whole lot better and a whole lot longer than your words. And it'll do more damage. And the third recommendation for body language is that you have to show confidence. Relax, don't fidget, look people in the eye, sit straight, show interest by leaning forward, show optimism. If you take out a wimp posture, people will think that you are very easy to push around. Now, we're almost at the end of the program, but not quite. I have a few more things to tell you. One more topic, and that is how to mediate conflict, either as a parent or as a manager, when other people have come to an impasse. Now, it's not an easy task to function as a mediator, because other people will expect you to, number one, be totally impartial, and number two, to give them the right answers. And you won't be able to do either one of those, nor would you want to. Now, here are the things that you need to do. There are 3 strategies that you need to employ as a mediator. First of all, structure the communication. That means set up the ground rules for discussion. When hostility among the 2 fighting parties is low, you can put them in the same room and you let them talk. All you do is facilitate. Make sure that the conflict doesn't escalate. But what should you do when the hostility is high? Now, unless you are a champion boxer or have a bulletproof vest, I would suggest that you separate them. You put one party in one room, you put the other party in the other room, and you shuttle back and forth. You are the conduit for their communication. Now, there are several advantages to that. Number one, you can translate all the 4-letter words into more reasonable language. And number two, you actually can help prevent conflict escalation. Another thing you need to do is teach them the on-task discussion rules that I just gave you. And the last thing is make sure that you set limits to conflict resolution. Rather than telling them, ask them and say, when do you think this conflict can be settled? The second strategy as a mediator in conflict resolution is to teach the 4 steps of problem solving, just the way that I talked about them. Help people identify their interests, help them prioritize those interests, help them understand the importance of mutual benefit, and don't dictate but facilitate their own agreement. The third thing that you need to do is increase the party's motivation to settle. Now, you may not always have to do that, but if there's some reluctance and you suspect that they are not settling their differences because they like your attention so much, then you must do something in order to motivate them to come to an agreement. Draw attention to common interests, because that is the stuff of which agreement is made. Emphasize team and organizational goals. Make sure that they understand how their solution of the problem will contribute to the overall good of the organization. Provide consequences for agreement or non-agreement. And make sure that you instill optimism that the problem can be solved. In conclusion, let me summarize the major points of this program. We have talked about the differences between disagreement and conflict. Why conflict occurs, when it is good, and when it is bad. We have examined positions versus interests, and I have pointed out to you how important it is to focus on interests. Then we looked at the 5 conflict strategies. The first 3 were yielding, withdrawing, and inaction. Those were our unilateral strategies. Then we talked about the 4th, which was confrontation, and the 6 contentious tactics. We told you how to recognize them, what to do when they are used on you, and how to protect yourself. And then we talked about the fifth strategy and the last, which was problem solving, which is the best way to get mutually beneficial outcomes to any conflict. You have listened and, I hope, evaluated my comments critically. I'd like to make a deal with you now. I would like for you to promise me that you are going to use some of the skills that I have presented. It will make all the difference in your life. Take good care of yourself and of the important relationships in your life.
This has been really great stuff. I'm really glad I had a chance to see it. You know, but I don't know if I can make that change. Yeah, I'm not sure that I can be that unselfish. I don't know if I'm that good a person.
But, you see, that's just it. You can do it. All of it. Just focus on the interests, not on the positions. Follow a few simple rules and you've got it made. And here is the clincher. Do it most of all because in the long run, it's the way to get what you want.
That's right. Just for me?
I hope that doesn't take the fun out of it.
No, that's great. It's terrific.
So, now you are free to go.
Really?
Really. As a matter of fact, why don't we all call it a day?
Really? Are you sure?
After you, my friend. You know, I was sure the door was that way.
No, it's over there.
This has been Dealing with Conflict and Confrontation with Dr. Helga Rohde. If you would like to share the benefits of a Career Track seminar with the members of your company or organization, you can have a customized program presented live at your location at any length, from 1 hour to a full day. For details, call our on-site department toll-free at 1-800-325-5854. For a free catalog containing all of Career Track's audio and videotape programs, call 1-800-334-1018. Thanks for watching, and congratulations on making Career Track your success company.